On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, we're going to preview the NBA trade deadline. What should the Thunder do? Who should the Thunder target? And grade your trades.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for InsideTheThunder.com, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. On today's show, brought to you by FanDuel, we're joined by Michael Martin at Michael on Sports on Twitter to discuss the Thunder trade deadline, who the Thunder should target, and grade your trades. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Michael, what a season that this has been for the Thunder. What do you view as, what the Thunder should do this week as the trade deadline looms on Thursday?
I think they just need to shore up some things on the back end and get some injury and just cold streak performance insurance behind some guys. I mean, you're going to live and die by Dub, Shea, Chet. If those guys go down, then you're just kind of it's over. But the rest of the guys, I think you can live with if there's an injury or something happens. But I would want to just shore up a little bit on the back end of the rotation, because if you win, it's going to be because of those main three guys. But at the same time, if you lose, you don't want it to be because of lack of help for them.
Yeah, I think that when you look at this Thunder season, it's been great to this point. You can talk about all the surprises and how great that they've been. There's also just no pressure to go make a huge move on Thursday. And I don't think that there's a huge move out there to be made, even if the Thunder were in a position where they wanted to go make a huge move. I'm not sure who would be out there to go target. And so I think that these trade deadline targets are going to have to be more in the margins and more reasonable to just kind of complete a roster versus overhaul it. And I think that for me, when you look at this Thunder team, and people always wonder about chemistry and what if you bring someone in and it alters the chemistry, the players that you would be sending out in most of these trades do not log a single minute of regulation basketball where the game's still in the balance. So, you would be replacing those minutes with someone, or replacing those 9 minutes with somebody who can actually play and at least give you the opportunity to put them into games and impact things in a positive way. So it's not as though you're going to be altering this team's chemistry. I don't think that it'll have any ill effect on the locker room or on the team's performance overall, based upon what the packages are probably going to look like.
Yeah, this should be something that helps you get to round 2 if you're very close without those guys that you trade for at the deadline, or help you win a couple more games in the first round. But this is not going to be something that shakes the foundation of this team where, you have to insert maybe a new starter, or you have to reconstruct sort of the pecking order of the roster and shots, qualities and frequency. I'm with you. I think that it's just somebody you add to the mix who helps out, but I don't think that they're going to be a headliner by any means.
And I think that you look at last year's roster, right, and last year's season got to this point at the deadline, and the Thunder still made a move to improve their team. They traded away Mike Muscala, traded away Darius Bazley, two guys who were at the forefront of team favorites and guys that the team rallied around as chemistry guys and good vibe guys for the team. They got Dario Saric, though, who is a better basketball player, and he improved the roster. And that's what it comes down to, is if you can improve the roster anyway, especially for giving up less significant players, it can really, really help you make that second half push, especially after the All-Star break. And whenever you look at this trade deadline, I think that they should target some guys on the margin that are in a similar vein to a Dario Saric level player, because it's just easier to make big, grand moves in the summertime than it is right now. Even if you pulled the trigger on something big right now, you wouldn't have enough time, honestly, to gel and to get on the same page and to learn the system in order to be your full self at the postseason. So why not, if you're already going to be behind the 8 ball to make a big trade in the postseason, why not just let this postseason be a season in which you get as much data points as you can on this team before you go make a more vast move?
Exactly. And Sam has talked to us about this before, where he said, we're not going to try to fix a problem we don't know we have yet. I think you can generally kind of assume or know that there is somewhat of a rebounding issue. So you probably want to get another big to back up Chet, and Jay will just be another bigger body out there. But I'm with you. I don't think you want to shake the whole foundation. And like you said in the summer, there's a lot of teams still now who are very confident, who are going to get a big reality check in the playoffs, and they'll come back to the table, and the Thunder are still going to have all of these assets, whether or not they make a trade at this deadline. So I'm with you. I think that the bigger deals wait to the summer, but I still think they make some type of move at the deadline this week.
Yeah, and Michael, obviously we have opinions of this team and of these players and how they all fit together and what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. But the way that I put it yesterday was that, this is, if you look at it as like a scientific method, while 50 games feels like a lot, you and I have been at every home game, covered every game. It feels like a lot because you're invested in it day in and day out at practices and things like that. When you take a step back, it's really not that large of a sample size. It's enough of a sample size to make a hypothesis. It's not enough of a sample size to know if that's going to be right or not. And I think that you can get there after the postseason with some of these assumptions about what the rosters are and what the roster is at this current point in time. So I think that we're aligned in that thinking.
Yeah, the playoffs are just a different animal. This is going to be the first time that we see Mark in a playoff environment. This is going to be the first time that we see Shea as the number one undisputed guy on the playoff scouting report that teams are going to try to take out. We're going to see J-Dub and Chet in the postseason for the first time. I mean, J-Dub played the play-in last season, but it's going to be very, very different. And we're going to see what other guys, your Aaron Wiggins, your Josh Giddey's, your Lou Dort's, your Isaiah Joes, how they look when the lights are brighter, because there are some guys, as we've seen with the Thunder, who step up under those circumstances. And there are other guys who, the lights, I don't want to say they're too bright, but they don't perform at the same level they do in the regular season.
The lights are too bright for this Thunder team, some might say, because of how young they are. And to me, this team to this point has proven that they're uncommon as a mature basketball team for their age and for their experience level. To me, they can't truly control that. I don't think that there's such a thing. If you firmly believe that this team is too young to go make a run, there's nothing that you can do at the deadline, because the difference in, this team making a run or not comes down to how they perform in the playoffs, as in how the key guys do, J-Dub, Chet, and SGA. And so getting a veteran who's been to playoff series, it isn't going to be the key difference. It can certainly help, but I think that that's a little bit overblown, mainly because I'm of the belief that with this team, you've got to put the trust in them because of what they've shown to this point of that advanced maturity level. And I don't believe that come April 1st, they're just going to forget what basketball is and how to play it. So I feel strangely confident about this Thunder team, but you look around the Western Conference, Michael, and what matchup do you just love? I think it's going to be a dogfight top to bottom in this conference.
Yeah, there's no cupcakes in the West right now, and I'm with you. I don't think that you can trade for somebody and they're going to come in and be the magic solvent for everything. And you need these guys to get their playoff lumps and their scars, because that's what we saw with Russ and KD for a very long time, is they had to take their lumps and they leveled up. But if you just protect these guys the whole time, I don't think it's going to work that way.
So we will get into some of the top targets. You've brought 5 to the table. I've brought 5 to the table, including a wild card that Michael and I have never talked about before in any setting, publicly on this podcast, or even just talking before games and after games. So that's going to be really fun to get surprised by those trade targets. But first, I want to tell you right now about our good friends over at FanDuel. Michael, it's the best time to go to FanDuel because it's Super Bowl week. You can go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to check out America's #1 sportsbook and make your super bets on Super Bowl Sunday, which, by the way, the Thunder play on Super Bowl Sunday. So you can make this a humongous day of parlaying and betting with the Thunder game in the afternoon, Super Bowl Sunday in the evening, and go check it out at FanDuel because they have player props, over-unders, spreads, parlays, all that good stuff at FanDuel.com/lockedon. And whenever you're a new customer, you can get $200 in bonus bets just by winning your first $5 bet or more at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can go there right now, and you don't have to wait for Super Bowl Sunday. You can bet on, of course, NBA action, NFL action, but also college basketball, hockey, and all that other stuff. But specifically NBA, the Thunder, despite their lengthy injury report, are 3.5-point favorites in Utah on Tuesday. You can go jump on that if you want to at FanDuel.com/lockedon. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you talking Thunder basketball. Michael, it's time. It's time to release the trade deadline preview and our favorite candidates for the Thunder. I'm going to let you start things off.
Number one, this is one we've talked about for a very long time before it became the popular one on Twitter for a while, and that's Kelly Olynyk. I think that's the number one guy I would go after. I think that he's very gettable. I know that Danny Ainge is going to ask for a lot of assets, but I think he's a guy who very much fits this team. Not a big ego. He shoots the three well. He can pass. He can defend well. He played in FIBA over the summer with Shea and Lou Dort. I think this is a great addition. What are your thoughts on Kelly Olynyk?
I am in love with the addition of Kelly Olynyk. And I think that the Danny Ainge thing, some of these narratives get kind of overblown a little bit. Danny Ainge is also a very reasonable human being and understands that there's not a ton to stand on with the whole Kelly Olynyk trade negotiations. It's the same thing with like what happens with the Thunder and Sam Presti. Like, oh, the Thunder never let anything leak. Well, yeah, they never do until they do. Like whenever, like their love of Pokusevski was telegraphed from here to Kingdom Come, during his draft. So Danny Ainge never makes a reasonable trade until he does. And I think that Kelly Olynyk will be one that is pretty reasonable, but he has that relationship with SGA and Lou Dort. You saw how he played off of them at FIBA over the summer, which he looked good in, besides his heroic shot he took in that one game at the end of the game. But other than that, he's been really good for this team and for those two players. And for this team, I think that he provides you such a nice weapon off the bench to spell Chet Holmgren, because as much as I love Jay Will, there are certain matchups where you'd rather have someone like Kelly Olynyk in there than a Jay Will. And I think that whenever you see the success also of how Jay Will plays with Chet, imagine Jay Will playing with Kelly Olynyk. That would ideally maximize both of those players if you could have that happen. So I think that the cost of it would be relatively cheap in terms of matching salary. And with 20 tradable second-round picks, who cares what Danny Ainge asked for? Because it's going to be a combination of second-round picks. Just throw him whatever he wants. It doesn't really matter at that point.
Yeah, and it's not a great draft this year. The problem is everybody knows that. It's not like we're going to know that, then these GMs don't. But Kelly Olynyk is also a guy who I could see being open to re-signing in Oklahoma City if you want to keep him as a backup or a rotation guy. He's played on some big teams and some big games. He hasn't won it all. There's going to be a market for him, but I think this is a guy who is the prime example of what we're talking about, where it's just like bolstering the second unit, helping these guys out, injury insurance for cold performances from some guys like Jay Will, and somebody who can just, be a great backup to Chet.
And I think that's a great point about this year's draft. And I think that it might shock you if you're listening to this for whenever Thursday's deals start coming out. All first round picks are not created equally. And that usually is said about like the fact of like the protections on the picks. But in this draft class, like if the Thunder give up 2 first round picks for someone of the caliber or even a little bit better than Kelly Olynyk, but if they're both in the 24 class, it doesn't really matter. That's the cost of doing business, because you want to give them multiple shots at finding a diamond in the rough in a draft class that is not good. It just really is not good. And I think that this sport has evolved to the point where there's going to end up being good rotational players out of this draft class, because the sport is so global that it's impossible to have 60 bad players. But the point would be there's not even that many starting level players in this draft class. Someone's going to pop, obviously, once it's all said and done. But heading into it, a lot of the guys who even are in the top 10, top 15 of mock drafts and big boards, their hope is to be a high-level contributor off the bench. And so that's where you're at with this draft, where you can see, not just from the Thunder, but from other teams as well, them being more willing to part with 24 picks than what you typically would see at the deadline. Because typically at the deadline, second-round picks is what make the deals go around.
Yeah, I'm with you. This upcoming draft, you draft somebody and you hope that they can be a role player in a few years. Why wouldn't you just trade the picks now and get a role player who you are 99% sure can be that guy right now when you probably need him, rather than stashing him in the G League or whatever it is?
So Kelly Olynyk was my number one. I'm going to move on to number 2, though, which is Dorian Finney Smith. I think that with Dorian Finney Smith, his defense is so incredible still to this day as he gets older in Brooklyn. And you just imagine that switchability and versatility in Oklahoma City, and him being surrounded by much, much, much better defenders. And I would say that he would be put into a situation where he's playing alongside the best defenders he's ever played with, going back to Dallas, to Brooklyn, to now, playing with them within the team. And with his versatility defensively, that can make nightmares for opposing offenses, especially in the playoffs when things go to the half court. And this is a guy who can shoot the lights out of the gym, and he's proven it on the big stage. If you're someone who's a fan of the idea of going to get experience and specifically playoff experience. This guy's been around big players and big time games. He helped Luka get to the Western Conference Finals at 22 years old, like the same relative experience level as SGA. Of course, SGA is a bit older than Luka at 24 right now than he was during that run, but the same relative postseason experience that the two will have. And so I think that Dorian Finney-Smith can come in and really just ignite this team down the stretch of the season and also in the postseason. He's played for some great coaches. He's played for some great teams, and he knows what it takes to manage a 7-game series.
Identical top two from us. You can tell we talk a lot just based on our taste here, but I'm with you. DFS, I think he would be great for this team as well. I think it's sort of a 1A, 1B between him and Kelly Olynyk. It just depends on really what you value. And if you can get both, that's phenomenal. But he's a guy who can fit with basically any rotation they want, any lineup they want. He can play the 4, he can play the 3, he can play small ball 5 if you want for some things, if you really get desperate. I think he's another dog off the bench that you can pair with Kenrich. And like you mentioned, his experience playing in some big games, he's not going to be rattled. He's going to be a guy who's ready to play. And I think that he would fit perfectly with this team. And I didn't really think about it the way that you did in terms of like the best defenders around him. But yeah, he's never had anyone to pair with him in a tandem as great as Lou Dort, and then at the rim, Chet Holmgren. I mean, Mikal Bridges is pretty good, and so is Nick Claxton. But I would say it's a little bit different level of category as far as Dort as a point of attack defender, and then Chet just blocking shots from everywhere.
And you go back and watch the highlights of that Mavericks run to the Western Conference Finals, and look at how Finney-Smith is always ready, always knocking down big shots off of Luka Doncic driving kicks. SGA is going to get a lot of that same attention and be able to kind of benefit from that as well for the Thunder. So I like Dorian Finney-Smith. I've been tracking him since the summertime as a trade target for the Thunder. So excited that he's available. And according to the New York Post, they're looking into it. We'll see if anything comes of it on Thursday. But your number 3, since we have the same top 2, is who, Michael?
Another Brooklyn net. I'm going with Cam Johnson. This one's going to be the longer term one because he does have 3 years left on his deal, not including this year, around $22 million per year. He's going to cost a little bit more because he does have that longer term deal where he can't leave. And he's a valuable commodity just in terms of a skill set as a 3-and-D player with some size. And we've seen him on some good teams. We've seen him with the Suns where they made a finals run. And I think that he would be a guy who would be a great compliment to Joe. And honestly, it gets as simple as you put shooters who can also defend at a decent rate next to Shea, you're going to win a lot of games. So I think that he's somebody who might cost a little bit more just because you're guaranteed to have him around longer if you want him. But I think he's a valuable player.
Yeah, so I think that the interesting part about this to explore would be that cost, because our first 2 names, we kind of know the cost. It's matching salary and second-round picks. And if for Dorian Finney-Smith, like we mentioned before, you give away a 24th first-round pick for him, who cares? The Nets get to say they got a first-round pick for him. It doesn't really matter. Now, for Cam Johnson, it is a much different ordeal. Off the top of your head, kind of, it doesn't have to be perfect, but like, what would you be willing to part with to be able to get Cam Johnson?
Oh boy, probably without looking at their assets and the Thunder's, I would probably say I would go with, you got to throw Bertans in for the money, and then probably 2 firsts and 2 seconds, or maybe you go 3 firsts that are all this year because you don't necessarily need any of those guys. And like we mentioned, you're going to have him for multiple years. So Cam Johnson is now your draft pick. So I would do that, and then maybe you get a couple seconds back. But I think the sticker shock of 3 firsts might get some people. But think about it, Ryan. The guys who the Thunder have taken at 18 to 20, it's Trey Mann, it's Poku, it's guys like that. It's a real crapshoot at that part of the draft. It's very, very hard. That's why we can all remember the guys who go in that range, like Tyrese Maxey, who really pop off. So I'm of the opinion that you can spend on a guy like Cam Johnson and spend a lot of assets just for this draft, and I don't think it'll kill you in the long term.
Exactly. I think that with Cam Johnson, the Woj tweet for that scenario would send people into a frenzy, but I am way more than comfortable for the Thunder trading out of this draft. It's just to that level where, again, if you're hoping that they eventually turn into rotational players, the Thunder just are not on that same timing, really. Now, maybe, everyone's wrong whenever they evaluate this draft. Maybe, of course, the NBA guys get paid way more than we do to make these decisions, but as of right this moment, it doesn't appear that there'd be an instant impact player like a Cason Wallace, like a J-Dub, like a Chet in this draft at any range in the draft. So trading away 3 first-round picks even would not be too much of a harm. But I think that you look around also at Indiana. This has been something that's kind of cooled off since the Siakam trade. When the trade first went down, these two guys were heavily in trade talks of Jalen Smith and Isaiah Jackson. Jalen Smith, I think, plays more thundery than Isaiah Jackson does, but Isaiah Jackson would give you a curveball. And I think that a curveball is very important in the postseason. Going back to Dallas, they threw in Boban Marjanovic into the Clippers series, and it really junked things up and helped them win some minutes. Sure, you want to play to a certain identity, but you also want to be able to counteract that and kind of give the opponent something different to look at. Isaiah Jackson could do that, but Jalen Smith, with his shooting and with his more versatile style, he can certainly fit with the Thunder more so. Do you like either one of those guys for the Thunder?
I like Jalen Smith a little bit more, of just having a constant guy who can, somewhat protect the rim. Nobody's Chet. And then also he's not Chet as a shooter, but a guy who can reasonably space out to 3 as your 5 and just open lanes up for Dub and Shea and Giddey and all these guys, I think is ideal. I think a guy like Isaiah Jackson, who, correct me if I'm wrong, is more known as an athlete, I think would be a little bit harder to add to the mix just because they haven't had anybody like that. I'm with you with change of pace guys, but I think that more than anything, the Thunder really want to keep their identity of as many guys who can space the floor as possible, especially at those big spots.
So we're at number 4, and your number 5 is the wild card who we've never talked about. So number 4 for you is...
I'm not going to go with another net. I could. It's just boring, but I'm going to go with another big that we have talked about that I think you brought up to me that I thought was a good one, or we thought of at the same time in some clairvoyance thing. But Cavon Looney, I think that he's very interesting if the Warriors ultimately decide to sell, which they probably should. He's a guy who has dealt with injuries and things like that. But if you talk about someone with battle scars who's played against quite literally or almost literally every great big in the West in some playoff capacity, he's the guy. And he's going to be somebody who's not going to require a lot of minutes. He's somebody who can pass and play within the structure of this team. He can't space the floor, but he's a decent rim protector. He's an underrated rebounder. And I think that he would just fit very nicely into this team in this rotation. And you can mitigate some of those injury concerns by just not needing to play him a ton under certain circumstances unless you get matched up with Minnesota or the Lakers or Denver or somebody. And then, with that, it's great to have him.
Yeah, not only will he not require minutes, but it'd be beneficial for him to take some minutes off with Oklahoma City style. So I really like Kevin Looney. We talked about him a lot. And another one this is one we haven't talked about a ton, but I think is interesting. And I'm not even sure if I'm sold on him. It's just an interesting name to add in, specifically because I'm kind of curious. I still don't have a good feel of what it would take to get Wendell Carter Jr. Where do you land on him, and what do you think might be the price range for him?
I don't know. He seems like the guy who's right in the middle of starting center to backup center. And I'm always very hesitant on those guys in terms of I don't know how much they're going to end up getting paid. I liked him out of the draft, but just following him with Orlando, I'm not sure. I'd be interested if the Thunder believe in him enough to trade for him. I'd sell myself on it, but I'd be a little bit hesitant on him as a guy to add. He seems like someone you would add in the postseason. I don't know. Whenever I'm looking at a lot of these bigs that we've mentioned, whether it be Looney or Olynyk, it's more guys who are veterans who have been there. And it seems like Wendell Carter Jr. is still an unfinished product who's still developing. And I don't know that I would want to be in the business of, pushing him and Chet at the same time, trying to figure out who they are.
We have our wild cards coming up. Plus, we're going to grade your takes. But first, I want to tell you right now about our friends over at BetterHelp. Check out BetterHelp today, because sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest, big or small. Certain things can really take a toll on you. So it's important to let those things out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today, I want to say that, it's a great time for you to jump in at BetterHelp.com and get something off of your chest, something that needs to be out of your mind and help you clear things up with an unbiased party. Check it out today because BetterHelp is there for you. And the best thing about BetterHelp is that it's all online. And so they're going to take this questionnaire, they'll match you with a licensed therapist and get going around your schedule. Many deterrents from therapy have been the fact that, you have to go to a brick and mortar building and there's just not enough time in the day to get it all done. This way with BetterHelp, since it's digital, it can be all around your schedule and really get you the help that can really be good for you. So check it out today at BetterHelp.com. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedInNBA. When you do, you get 10% off of your first month at BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Michael, it's time for our wild card round. Two guys between us who we've never discussed, which is going to have to be crazy for a fair warning, because we've discussed quite a lot of names. So these names might shock you, the listener, but who's your wild card?
I have been wrestling with this because it's like, I don't feel like we've discussed this, but there's a good chance that you're going to tell me, Michael, you're dumb. We have talked about him. But that is Bogdan Bogdanovic from the Atlanta Hawks. I think that he would be a nice piece for this team as insurance for Isaiah Joe getting hurt or going cold, Aaron Wiggins, Cason Wallace not being ready as a rookie. He's a guy who's never shot under 36% from three. He's a career 38% shooter from three. He's oh no, I have the wrong stats here. No. Yeah, 38.5 for his career, never under 36. That's right. He shot above 40 over the last 2 of the last four. He's 6'5", so he adds a lot of the Thunder size that you like. He's not an ideal defender, but he's not somebody you're necessarily going to have to hide at that size. He also can pass, he can dribble, he can shoot, he can do a lot of things. And he's been in some big games, like it seems like is the theme of this pod, of guys that we're looking to add to this team. And I just think overall he would be a nice piece and another heat check guy off the bench, because it seems like, especially last year, this team kind of came and gone with the shooting of Isaiah Joe. And I want to get some more insurance in case something does happen. Of course, we're not predicting that he's going to go cold around the playoffs, but that's just one of those things where if it does happen, you want to have some type of alternative.
Yeah, and I think that this would be beneficial too, to be able to keep playing Isaiah Joe even if he went cold from beyond the arc, because Isaiah Joe's made himself so much more valuable than just his three-point shooting, with his uptick in playmaking, his uptick in finishing, his uptick defensively and rebounding. So this allows you to still have a really good shooter while playing Isaiah Joe, even if he's not shooting the cover off the ball, because it's hard to do that for a sustained period, especially in big games, especially in the half court, mainly with what the Thunder are going to have to look like in the postseason. So I really like this one. It was surprisingly, we've gotten way too in the weeds and have skipped over that one. So you did a good job with your wild card pick. I think that the price would be relatively low. At the deadline, the currency is second round picks, and the Thunder have stockpiled 20 of them that they can trade. So they have what it takes to go acquire guys who improve this roster. And that's why throughout the last few years, whenever people keep saying, why second round picks, it's right now, because you can just name your price and go get whatever veterans out there that can help you overhaul this roster and get over the hump. My wild card is truly wild. Jalen Green. Kick the tires on Jalen Green, putting him in a structured system for the first time in his life, because the Ignite, as much as I love them, especially the first year, was not exactly the most structured environment for a player. The first time in his professional life to have structure, to have balance, to have a roster that is not just an AAU, like everyone go try to get buckets and see what happens. Like, you have a design designated role and responsibility each game, and a delicate balance. And as a scoring punch off the bench might be something to consider if the price is low enough. Although I don't think that the price is going to be too low, as they're trying to use him as like one of their big trade chips. But what do you think of Jalen Green in general? Can the lion be tamed, so to say?
You mentioned these were trades that we had not discussed before, and I see why you did not throw this one my way. You know my thoughts on Jalen Green. I'm not the biggest fan. I think it's interesting. I think this is more of a summer deal if you are going to take a risk. I also think that the Rockets would probably never do this, just the PR backlash of how connected these two franchises are, and if Jalen Green turned out to be good for this team. But I'm interested. I've talked about Jalen Green less as a star, but more as like that Malik Monk type role, as like a high energy shooter, great athlete who can come in and get buckets for you. I just don't think with this team and them wanting to win right now, and like you mentioned, he hasn't played in a lot of structured competitive environments, I don't think the runway would be long enough to get him ready for the playoffs. But I'm at least open to it, which, you knowing me, is a big difference in usually my thoughts on Jalen Green.
Yeah, that's a huge step in the right direction for your Jalen Green commentary. But Michael, let's grade some fake trades. Those of you that have been sending us in these fake trades since January. So some of these are all the way back from early January, mid-January. Like this one from T, who says, what about James Wiseman to the Thunder for Pokashevsky, Trey Mann, and 2 second-round picks?
I'll turn that down. James Wiseman, I think he's a theoretical basketball player. and we've already seen him just not be very good on multiple teams. I don't think, like with Mark, it's all about processing speed and understanding things, and I think that's what he lacks more than anything. So I get the idea of James Wiseman, but at that point, I would rather just hold on to what you have in those draft assets, and then Poku and Trey Man have been good locker room guys, so I see no issue with keeping them around.
Does Isaiah Stewart interest you at all?
That's more interesting. More interesting. I've liked Isaiah Stewart for a while. He seems like sort of power forward Dort in a way, how Pistons fans talk about him, where there's some shot selection issues and concerns, but he's tough. He's going to bring it. He's going to fight. He's going to be in the mix for a lot of those things. So I wouldn't mind him as a 9th or 10th man. The problem is he's been like a top 5 guy a lot of these years for the Pistons, but I think a new change of scenery for him and a new role that's very, very much condensed would be interesting.
So this is a player that you have really enjoyed talking about throughout this trade deadline season, but we didn't get to you on the show. This fake trade is Kyle Kuzma to the Thunder for Davis Bertans, Trey Man, another second, and a first.
Oh, I'm doing that in a heartbeat. That's so easy because if it's a first in this draft, I'm assuming it's just nothing. I don't think the Wizards would do this, but you're not giving up any of your core guys. And he's somebody who can play in your starting lineup, or he can come off the bench and be a dynamic 6th man. He can stretch the ball to 3. He has some underrated passing chops. I think he's an underrated rebounder as well. And he's somebody who's played on a championship team. And I understand that there have been people who have discounted it because it's like, oh, he was a 7th or 8th man. Well, guess what? That's what he would be roughly on this team. So I'm very high on that. He can play small ball 5. He can guard pretty well on the wing. I think that he's a guy who, although he's been in a losing environment, would be able to snap back into it playing on the Thunder.
And then this trade kind of ties into Shams Charania's report is Andre Drummond for 2 seconds and Poku. The more so, independent of the trade, because I think that's probably what the trade's going to look like. What are your overall feelings on Andre Drummond, who isn't exactly thundery, but also is one of the better backup big men in the NBA? And for that price, just to have that tool in your toolbox might be a little bit worth it for Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I think that's sort of your last resort you put on the back burner of like, if everything fails, we can do this. And I don't know a ton about Andre Drummond, like personally, what he would bring to the locker room and things. He's not a guy who I think can shoot from 3. I think that Mark would have to wrangle him in on some of those things where he likes to take it on the break and other stuff like that, sort of the Shaqtin' a Fool Drummond plays. But as far as just a backup big who can just be serviceable and not cost you minutes and play 10 or so minutes in a playoff game, I think that that's decent. And then giving up 2 second-round picks and salary filler, I don't think is a big deal. So I'd be in on that, but I would explore other options first.
Now, PJ Washington is another fan favorite on these fake trades. Do you have any favoritism for PJ Washington? I think that I can't get to the point where I'm like, oh yeah, this is a guy the Thunder should go get. I'm more so at the point where it's like, if we got the notification that the Thunder have traded for PJ Washington, I'm like, oh, pretty cool. But I'm not just like itching for it.
How much do you think this is just a thing because PJ Washington killed the Thunder last year in a big game?
I think that's a large majority of it, and the Kentucky stuff and those kind of things. I don't think it's very basketball related. Probably.
I think he would be a good guy to change up scenery, like Malik Monk whenever he got out of the Charlotte whatever cesspool they have over there. But I would say I'm PJ Washington agnostic. I'm open to it. I just don't have a lot of strong opinions because we've never maybe I'm a casual. I'm not beating my door down to watch League Pass to watch Charlotte a lot of times, especially when LaMelo and Brandon Miller haven't been playing. And I've seen some decent things from him, but there's nothing that stands out to me of just like, oh, this is the guy to go get. So I'm with you. If they make the trade for him, I'd be a little bit surprised, but I would trust Sam in the front office on that. But it's not a guy who I'm willing to put I'm not willing to put stuff on the line out for and say, this is the guy they need to go get.
One Hornet that I'm very interested in, especially for the Thunder specifically, is Gordon Hayward. We've talked about him a lot too. And I've been on the Charlotte flagship radio station and the Buzz City Beat Pod as well, talking about the Thunder and Hornets making a trade. With Gordon Hayward, I understand the injury risk, but if there's ever a team that can take on that injury risk, it's Oklahoma City, because they're only going to be asking for matching salary, who, again, you don't play. So the matching salary part doesn't matter at all. It's just a bookkeeping thing. And then a couple second-round picks. And let's just say that you make that trade and God forbid Gordon Hayward gets hurt the next game. you gave away 2 of 20 second-round picks for Gordon Hayward and got nothing out of it. You shrug your shoulders and move on. It does not impact your life at all because those second-round picks are so easily gotten back in a different trade in the summer or next year or whenever to restock that pile of these second-round picks. So I would really enjoy trading for Kelly Olynyk, yes, but also Gordon Hayward specifically because it's no risk to me. The injury risk is just not there for the Thunder as it would be for other teams. They're already not going to count on him as much as other depthless teams. And also, if the worst thing happened, it's not the worst thing for Oklahoma City.
Yeah, he's the factor wild card guy that you could trade for. You can put him on a minutes restriction immediately, and I would make him a backup and just say, here are Mitsic's minutes for a lot of nights. You're going to play 10 to 12 minutes. We're just going to run you out there, see how you look. He's a guy who has enough ball handling chops, enough passing ability to do that. And I think he just fits in pretty seamlessly with a lot of guys on the roster. And he's another guy who doesn't have a big ego, who's going to come in and play the right way. He seems very thundery in a lot of ways. It's just the injury thing. But if you give up Bertans expiring, who's probably not going to play for you in the playoffs anyways, and 2 second-round picks just for like a long shot, I think that's absolutely worth it.
That's a lottery ticket worth scratching off. Michael, what is your prediction for what will happen on Thursday?
Oh boy. I'm going to say one of Olynyk or Dorian Finney Smith. I'm going to say one of those two guys are the top 2 on our boards. Maybe that's wish casting, but I think they go and get one of those guys just to supplement the roster like we've been talking about and sort of just bolster the rotation. But anything other than that, I'd be pretty surprised by. Or no, I wouldn't be surprised by it. But star trade, I'd be surprised by. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing who they trade for, how much they give up, and the guy they get, because that's going to tell us a lot about what Sam is kind of thinking this roster might be missing.
Yeah, I think that the trade deadline, they will do something. I would, even if it's something as limited as Bazley and Poku as a impending restricted free agent, just kind of getting him out of there for some other player like Saric was last year for Bazley, who ended up being really good after you traded Muscala. They'll do something at the deadline. And the misinformation from the Thunder's camp, like Zach Lowe talked about, is for sure real because they have the luxury for it to truly be real. Because no matter what you pitch, the Thunder should be doing. If you think that the Thunder should be being ultra aggressive or being ultra conservative of just like, hey, let this team ride it out, both of those things are very sound thoughts for this team. And because of that, no one can get a good read on what they're doing. So they might do something that causes us to have an hour-long emergency podcast at the deadline. That's just, based upon what they have in terms of like their assets. I don't think that they're going to do that. I think that they're going to do something that improves this roster. I think that Friday morning, you will look at the Thunder team and say they got better. I don't think that it'll be like this jaw-dropping, earth-shattering move, though. So in the same vein of a Kelly Olynyk or Dorian Finney-Smith or someone of that caliber.
I'm going to leave you with some old Oklahoma wisdom of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You are tied for the number 1 seed in the West. If you can get some guys who can add to that, that's great, but let's not risk it and shake it up and see who they can add with a big piece. That's something that maybe you can do in the summer, but I'm with you. I'd be floored if there's a guy who's like a current all-star, like if we say former all-star, like Gordon Hayward would count for that. So I'm not saying that, but I don't think this is going to be something where we're like, oh man, the entire landscape of the West and this team has changed. I think it's going to be something that makes the team better and helps in certain areas, but it's not going to be something that just ascends them to the next level as a contender.
Yeah, that's exactly right about this Thunder team specifically. Whenever you are getting so zeroed in on one team and you're watching all 50 games to this point of their season, it's so easy to pick apart every individual thing that they do wrong and all their flaws. There is no perfect team in this association. There just isn't, and there never will be a perfect team in the NBA. Even the Boston Celtics, who I think is far and away the best team in the NBA, they have flaws too. And so you're just never going to find a way to cover everything up. And so for the majority of their basketball season so far, and also the majority of their basketball skills are really good. That's why they're the top team in the West. Yes, they do have some shortcomings in terms of size and rebounding. They also use that to their advantage, though, on the flip side, to be this good. So the point being, as you mentioned, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's gonna be you're always gonna have holes to plug on the ship. But for the most part, the Thunder have limited those holes and have looked really, really good this season.
Yeah, it should be exciting. And I think that some guys are still due to take some extra steps, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing what happens in the deadline. I'm sure we'll have some big reactions afterwards.
Michael, let them know where they can go watch your fantastic Chet Holmgren video, what you've got cooking up, and also find you on across all social medias.
So at Michael on Sports is on YouTube and on Twitter. I did a compilation video breakdown of Chet's shot blocking from this year that Rylan has kindly plugged. And then the sneak peek scoop is that Jalen Williams will have a video coming out on Wednesday at some point talking about his fourth quarter magic and just how good he's been in January. So looking forward to having some things on that. And then I'm hoping to get back in the podcast game soon. It's been a little bit of a hiatus going back to my time with Thunder Buddies, but I miss doing it with people like Rylan. So I'm happy to get back in the game.
Always appreciate the kind words. That was a Locked On Thunder exclusive scoop, by the way, about that video on Wednesday. So make sure you credit Locked On Thunder if that ever gets out and gets leaked from this show. But Michael, thanks for joining us. We're going to do this again very, very soon. And so until next time, be good and be good to one.